setback and design standards or design element standards, because a lot of times on the left-hand side, that example, they're more narrow lots where folks are accessing the alley, but on the right-hand side, they're usually wider lots, maybe not as deep. And the homes are that way as well. So just the standards weren't fitting in every neighborhood. So the context-based approach, we analyzed the city and working with the public in developing 6 neighborhood contexts for the city. We identified defining characteristics such as block pattern and use and density and height and building forms, and we developed these 6. And if you go to our website, there's a lot more detail on these components, but generally we have a suburban neighborhood context, and that's found in southeast and southwest Denver. Southmore is an example. Marlee has some suburban context to it as well, and that's where you find your curvilinear streets, your attached garages that are loaded to the front, and you don't have alleys. Our urban neighborhood, I'll skip urban edge and jump back to that. Our urban neighborhoods are those consistent urban patterns where you have a rectangular grid, you have detached sidewalks, you have garages facing the alleys with either no driveways off the front or very little driveways off the front. And the picture shows a new example. So we have old and new in our city. So Washington Park is an example of an established closer in urban neighborhood, but then Stapleton has also been designed as an urban neighborhood. So you can do old and new. An urban neighborhood can be old and new. And then an urban edge neighborhood is really where we found more of the 1950s development where the grid pattern is very similar to an urban neighborhood, but yet the homes that were constructed at that time, the market was really calling for garages and less use of the alley and less use of sidewalks. So these neighborhoods often have a mix of sidewalks, no sidewalks, alleys, no alleys. Sometimes there's a front-loaded garage, sometimes there isn't. So there was enough of this pattern in our city to warrant its own neighborhood context. So that's an urban edge. And an example of an urban edge neighborhood would be Hilltop and some of Park Hill have kind of that mix. So these top three neighborhood contexts are predominantly single-family residential neighborhoods in the city. They do offer other uses, such as embedded commercial areas, but they're predominantly single-family. The neighborhood context in the bottom 3, the general urban is where you find, it's still a very urban pattern of rectangular grid and alleys and sidewalks, but the building forms are more apartment buildings, townhouses, and even high-rises. So it's our higher density residential areas. The urban center is where we see lots of mixed use, so Cherry Creek and on the edges of downtown and near our transit stations, for example. So you have a lot of active ground floor uses and retail and commercial. And then, of course, our downtown is really our downtown. So while urban center can be found in different areas of the city, our downtown is only one location, of course. So we use these as an organizing mechanism for all of our zone districts and our regulations to make sure that the regulations responded to the different characteristics of those neighborhoods. So the next piece is that right now our current code, if you've looked at it and are familiar with it, it's pages and pages of words, a few numbers thrown in, but it's very difficult to really read and understand what you can do. And it's also written in an old way of saying lots of discussion about what you can't do as opposed to what you can do. And that's been very confusing and very difficult for folks. So a lot of times when an applicant comes in, whether it's just someone trying to construct a home or an addition on their home, they design it how they want it, and then they come in and say, okay, did I meet the standards? Because they're not really sure how to read the standards. So what we want to do is make sure it's a code that is easy to read, it is understandable, and it talks about what you can do. So there's a predictability for a property owner in terms of an understanding of what they can do with their property, but then also what their neighbors can do with their property. So that's the form-based approach. And so what we use is a lot of graphics and images and things like that to help illustrate what you can do and what are the requirements. And in the draft, we have a very clearly laid out set of tables and graphics to help understand that. So, the left-hand side shows how you measure those things, and on the right-hand side are tables with all of those numbers. So that's replacing all of those paragraphs. So it's very easy, just in a matter of 2 pages, you know what your setbacks are, you know your maximum height, for example. The last piece is, of course, the regulations, definitions, and procedures are found throughout the code and are very difficult to use. Even as you go through the code, it's hard to really know for sure that you've captured all the right definitions and all the right requirements, because things are scattered throughout. So what we're doing with the improved organization is consolidating those pieces into one article so that you know this is exactly where you need to be with the procedures and things like that. So I'll just show you very quickly how we've organized the code to improve the user-friendliness of it. The first 2 articles, there's a total of 13 articles in the code. The first 2 articles are your typical introductory regulations, just establishment of the districts or the code. The next 3 through 8 are those neighborhood contexts. So once you know your context, you know you can just go right to that article and find your regulations. We also have a section on special contexts because we recognize that there are some zone districts and some properties that don't fall into a neighborhood context, but still, of course, we would certainly have zoning for them. So an example would be our parks or the airport. And then all of the, sorry about that. And then all of the applicable design standards, use and building form standards, zoning procedures and enforcement, those are all contained in each individual article. So you don't have to flip around to different parts of the code. It's all contained in one place. In Article 13, all rules of measurement and all definitions. So very quickly on how you use the new code you enter the zoning code just as you would today. You have a zone district, so you find out what your zoning is, and then you enter the code and you find out what you're allowed to do within the code. And we have a new naming convention for our zone districts, which we hope will be more user-friendly. Right now we have R1, B1, CM, we have all these different letters and numbers that really don't have as much substance or meaning to them. So now we've developed a new naming convention for the zone districts. So the first letter of your zone district indicates what your context is. So that way you know exactly which article to go to. So this example of USUC, U would be your urban neighborhood context. The second set of letters indicates the predominant land use and form. So the SU is single unit. And then the third letter or number, and depending on the zone district, there's a couple different options, indicates, it gives you a nod to the intensity or the density of that zone district. So when it comes to single unit, the letters mean the minimum lot size. But if we're talking about a mixed use district, when there's a number, that tells you what the maximum height is. So for example, today in our code, we have a B2 zone district. The 2 doesn't mean anything. It just means that it was the second in the order of the business districts. Today, a 2 means, or under the new code, the 2 would mean maximum height 2 stories. So we think that improves the predictability and understanding. So just to kind of show you some examples of kind of just deeper into the code, how we're using graphics and tables to illustrate the regulations more so than we have today, just wanted to show you a couple of clips. So for example, the description of the neighborhood context, it's organized consistently. There are images, very easy to read text with bold words. There is a very clear list of zone districts that are allowed in that context. There are tables that indicate what building forms are allowed in each zone district. So again, we're just using tables to summarize what's allowed and what's not allowed, so it's very clear for the user. And as I showed you before, we've got graphics and tables, again, to show what the regulations are. And then if there is any special design standards, such as parking, that's another set of regulations that is scattered throughout the code that we're consolidating into one place and making it very clear what your parking requirements are. And although it's a form-based approach, and certainly there's an emphasis on the form, we are still regulating uses. There is still a list of allowed uses in each zone district. But now we have it in much more easy to read and understand table so that you can compare different zone districts and you can see the different uses and how they line up. So for folks that just want to know, here's